Audience discretion is advised due to potentially distressing and sensitive material. Oscar Pistorius had a unique childhood. He was born on November 22, 1986 in Johannesburg, South Africa to Christian parents Henka and Sheila, and was the middle child of the family. He had an older brother and a younger sister. He was born with fibular hemimelia, which is the congenital absence of the fibula, and he suffered from it in both legs. So when he was just 11 months old, both of his legs were amputated halfway between his ankles and knees. He learned how to walk 6 months later on fiberglass pegs. Now, what was truly unique and admirable about him was that even though he had a tough time accepting what had happened to him when he was only a baby, he got into sports at a pretty young age and didn't let this define who he was, which later he said was all thanks to his mom, who played a pretty significant role in his life. So when he was 11, he got into water polo, tennis, wrestling, boxing, skipping, etc. He was truly mesmerized with sports and was really good at whatever he did. Some said that they didn't even notice that Oscar had no legs because of how good he was at playing sports. I mean, they literally didn't catch on for 6 months or so. Though after a serious knee injury while playing rugby in 2003, he couldn't play some of the sports he was into and was eventually introduced to running by a coach. When he was 26, he met Riva Steenkamp, and they became good friends to the extent that he accompanied her to an award ceremony in South Africa. Although the pair did become an official couple later on and claimed the golden couple title of the time. This friends-turning-couple thing happened in November of 2012. Who is this Riva Steenkamp, you may ask? Well, Riva was born on August 19, 1983 in South Africa. She graduated from university with a Bachelor of Laws degree in 2005 when she was 22 and applied to the bar in 2011 hoping to be qualified by age 30. While studying for her degree and thereafter, she worked as a paralegal to remain in the world that she was so passionate about. But mind that Riva had an even more interesting life than meets the eye. In addition to being a paralegal, Riva also worked as a model, and she had been doing so since a very young age. She was sociable, sweet, beautiful, and charismatic in both worlds. She modeled for FHM magazine and was the first model ever to advertise and become the face of Avon in South Africa. She once worked as a presenter for a fashion TV show in South Africa and was just starting to become world famous through doing shows and ads for different companies when she met Oscar. So apparently, Riva's friends questioned why she chose to date Oscar when she had every man falling at her feet to date her, which I find strange considering that Oscar was also a source of inspiration and working in the world of fame. But Riva just waved them off, telling them that she appreciated his strength and was proud of what he had accomplished given what he was given. We are guessing that since Riva herself had to learn how to walk all over again after she broke her back in a horse riding incident in her early 20s, they had a lot in common and she really understood him and he her on a level no one ever had. It's Valentine's Day 2013 and Oscar and Riva have been dating for a while. On this night, Oscar shoots 4 bullets through the locked door of his bathroom at his Pretoria house, 3 of which hit Riva on the other side of the locked door. Oscar immediately breaks down the door with a bat and finds his girlfriend slumped over the toilet. He starts screaming for help, and one of the first people to show up at the scene is his neighbor, Dr. Johan Strip, who does everything he can to save Riva's life. But as testified, her pupils were fixated, there was no pulse or any sign of breathing movement, she was already gone. Well, Oscar claimed that he thought Riva was an intruder, and that's why he shot her through the door of the bathroom. This is how it went by what Oscar related in court after he was arrested and charged with murder. Oscar said that on February 13, 2013, everything was going really well. Riva was doing her yoga and he was watching TV waiting for her to come to bed. Then they both fell asleep. In the early hours of the morning, Oscar woke up because he felt hot. Riva was already up and asked him if he was okay and why he couldn't sleep. Meanwhile, Oscar goes to get a fan from the balcony and closes the sliding doors and curtains when he suddenly hears a noise coming from the bathroom and thinks it's an intruder who has broken in and is hiding out in the bathroom. He grabs his gun from under the bed and whispers to Riva to call the police. He said he was too scared to turn on the lights, and while he was headed to the bathroom, he shouted some words telling anyone who he thought was in the bathroom to get out. In his words, it was pitch dark and he thought Riva was still in bed. He also added that as he had no time to strap on his prosthetic legs, he was walking around on his thumbs and felt extremely vulnerable and scared. After he shoots through the door, he yells out for Riva again to call the police, at which point he realizes that Riva was not in bed, and it's only then that it dawned on him what he had just done. He then returns back to the toilet door calling out for Riva, but because the toilet door is locked, he walks back to the sliding doors leading to the balcony and screams out for help. He then puts on his prosthetic legs and tries to break down the door, but when this doesn't work, he grabs a cricket bat and smashes the door in. Oscar was cross-examined for 5 days about his version of events. Of course, police interrogations did not stop there, and neighbors were also interviewed in order to come up with a timeline of events. There were conflicting narrations of what took place on that fateful night. Some neighbors backed up what Oscar had said. One of them even testified that Oscar was crying, he was broken, and he was praying. He kept saying, quote, "I shot her. I thought she was an intruder. I shot her." End quote. Some said they could hear a woman screaming right before the gunshots and that they'd heard the couple arguing earlier that night. The defense, however, stated that this version did not add up when considering the timeline, and Riva was already shot dead when witnesses said that they'd heard her scream for help or that they heard both a man and a woman screaming. At the same time, some said that it was Oscar, only a man's voice screaming, and his voice had become high-pitched because he was so scared and nervous, and the gunshots that were heard were actually the sound of Oscar breaking down the door with a bat. So basically, the defense claimed that this act was totally unintentional, and Oscar really did mistake Riva for an intruder and concluded that this was a reasonable mistake, not murder. He was simply acting in self-defense for himself and for his girlfriend. Some claim that Oscar and Riva were in a loving and caring relationship, while others argued that it was a toxic relationship where Riva was not treated the way she should have been. So what they did next was dive into the text between the couples. The defense stated that 90% of the messages exchanged between the two were of a loving nature and they really cared for one another, while the other 10% focused on Oscar's jealousy and possessiveness, when it came to Riva, though it was said that all relationships have their ups and downs and involve some extent of volatile messages and words. One of the messages that was brought up and sent from Riva to Oscar was, quote, "I'm scared of you sometimes, of how you snap at me," end quote, and said that the way he behaved towards her when surrounded by friends was sometimes nasty. Another text message was, quote, "You have picked on me excessively. I do everything to make you happy, and you do everything to throw tantrums," end quote. In another message, she said, quote, "We are living in a double standard relationship. Every 5 seconds, I hear how you dated another chick. You really have dated a lot of people, yet you get upset if I mention one funny story with a long-term boyfriend," end quote. Riva was particularly upset about a friend's engagement party when she was forced to leave early because of Oscar throwing another tantrum. Apparently, after getting food, Riva had seen an old friend who was a guy and left to talk to him while Oscar stood behind her and watched her catch up with her friend, and accused her of flirting with him because she was touching the friend's arm. Speaking of exes, Oscar's ex-girlfriend also brought into light that Riva was the reason the pair had split up, and she also revealed that she also found him possessive and jealous and actually went the extra mile to hide his gun from him because she feared for her life. And yes, this is the same gun Riva was killed with. In another incident, Samantha, the ex, said that while shouting at her, Oscar drove his Porsche at an insanely high speed to punish her for an argument they'd had earlier. The prosecution, digging into his past, also found that Oscar has spent a night in jail after a woman claimed that he'd assaulted her during a party at his house. Though all of this was counteracted by the defense painting a good-natured man who was simply trying to defend his girlfriend and himself and made a mistake. They brought witnesses to the stand that testified Oscar was a fun-loving and calm person who rarely got angry or lost his temper. They brought up messages that told the story of a new couple who were truly fascinated with one another and were enjoying the time they had together. One message was sent on February 13th, just a few hours before Riva was shot, in which she wrote, quote, "You are an amazing person with so many blessings, and you are more than cared for," end quote. Another Valentine card was brought up where Riva had written, quote, "I think today is a good day to tell you that I love you," end quote. Although June Steenkamp, Riva's mother, did stick to her guns and swore up and down that Riva was not in fact in a loving relationship and wanted to break up, she even went as far as telling the court that her daughter had decided not to consummate the relationship because she was not sure that they'd last. Pistorius admitted to shooting and killing his girlfriend Riva, but he emphasized and swore up and down that he did so thinking that Riva was actually an intruder. Another point that he tried to make in court was that he suffered from acute anxiety and took medication and sometimes called his sister, who lived nearby, to just come over and sit with him while the episode passed. He also added that since he didn't have his prosthetic legs and was walking around on his stumps, he was feeling extra vulnerable and in a weak position, which led him to panic and left him unable to think.
You could just take off the legs then. If you can maybe just stand on my side where I can see when they talk there. Respect for the Appeal Court of Appeals finding. I absolutely respect it. But we're dealing with sentence. We have to see rationality now in the context of sentence. And what we have, and these facts can be tested. Just hold on to them. These are the distilled facts that can be tested. let's look at who is the person. After incorporating the Supreme Court of Appeals finding that you must sentence today.
In September 2014, he was found guilty of culpable homicide, which means that the court didn't believe this was premeditated, and he was sentenced to only 5 years in prison but only served 10 months. However, in December 2015, the verdict was overturned and Pistorius was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 13 years and 5 months in prison with the possibility of parole. In January 2024, he was released from prison after serving more than 8.5 years and is now living a quiet life with his uncle.
Well, in a statement, Heidi alluding to it there, Reeva Steenkamp's mother, June, says her only desire is that she will be allowed to live her last years in peace, with her focus remaining on the Reeva Steenkamp Foundation. We're now joined by family spokesperson Tanya Kun. Ms. Kun, thank you very much. If you don't mind, could you take us back a little bit, because June Steenkamp believes that Oscar Pistorius has never been truthful and has not shown remorse. Why did the family choose not to oppose parole?
So you will recall that in March this year, June and Barry opposed the parole. They made certain submissions to the parole board, but in November this year, Barry had passed, and it was a very emotional time for June, and to walk this journey alone was a very difficult one for her. And she also realized that, and she's known this since the beginning, that the day will come when Oscar will be released on parole. Therefore, she saw it fit to do a victim impact statement to place her reservations before the parole board so that the parole board could make an informed decision.
She does say there can never be justice if your loved one is never coming back.